So, welcome back to Silmarillion Total War and to the second of the replays I'm going to be recording here in open field battles, and this must be a new map because it's got these wrecked elven ships here on the coast. It's a rather nice looking map, to be honest with you. And as I mentioned in the last battle replay, I'm essentially doing these replays now, which are not large scale, really grinding sieges, because I really don't think the weather is all that conducive to my PC recording those large scale battles as it stands. So we're going to be falling back on the Silmarillion Discord to see us through this heatwave week, albeit this will be a few weeks in the future for you. We're going to be seeing another pitch battle today. This one billed as a showdown between the Easterlings and Angband. I mean, there's certainly a distinctly evil feeling to this battle replay, albeit I think there is a good faction on either side. Yeah, so I mean, well, Doriath probably the most squeaky clean morally of all of these factions that are on display today, but yeah, the last one all good aligned factions. This one certainly a darker feeling to this one. But like I said, this is actually a map with maybe a little bit more in terms of terrain features than the last one on the Dwarven Road, mainly because there are these cliffs and little hills that are going to be blocking some advances. There's a little bit more in terms of tree cover on the interior of the map. But I don't think that's going to matter too much. I mean, there's a little bit of undulating terrain, but for the most part it's going to be another open affair. So, let's go through the army compositions before we get into this one. Only 15k frames as well, so it's going to be quite a violent one, this, but considering the density of orcish and just more numbers-focused evil factions on the field today, I'm not too surprised by that. Starting off with Waffles once again, who's taking up the role of the Easterlings. He's got some Croatani nomads over here. Very basic as far as horse archers go, but they are also very numerous, and facing off against Angband, I mean, I don't know if horse archers are necessarily going to be the answer against Angband, but hiding them in the back corner for later on could have the desired effect. Utilise them a bit later. Meanwhile, looks like he's got more than one unit of Fangs the Faithless, so he's had to go into the red limit on them, but again, the Eastling's not really designed for this sort of long-range skirmishing. Fangs the Faithless allow them to at least contest this fight, and they're very good at it. I mean, they're not as good in melee as maybe they would look, but really it's their horse archers which pick up most of the slack, and the Salamandrine Guard can certainly do that. A bit of an anti-monster, it's either an anti-cavalry or an anti-monster bonus that they have, maybe both. Either way, it is going to be useful against Angband. I mean, those flaming arrows as well will be good at maybe dispersing the rabble if Angband start to struggle. We've got a catapult, which the catapult manned by these Clan Guard of Lothlin. There is an Angband artillery piece on the field, so they would be looking to snipe that out and then maybe hit centre mass of the large Angband force. It's going to be easier to hit Angband just because they are a larger army in general. It's going to be interesting to see what the clash between the two front lines is going to be like as well. I mean, Clan Guard of Lothlin and Halberdiers of Lothlin. Angband have got access to Halberdiers as well, so this could be one of the few times in Silmarillion where we do actually see polearm on polearm front lines start to form. Amberona Honour Guard as well, obviously the tankiest unit of infantry the Eastlings have to offer. A large shield value, multiple HP, thick armour as well. So yeah, going to be interesting this. I mean, I think in terms of line infantry and spears and the like, Angband do have an edge, but the Easterlings with their halberds, and I mean, they're going to be able to defeat iron shots with a little bit more impunity. Warband of Lothlin and yet more halberdiers, so certainly here the Eastlings going a little bit more for their heavier units, which is understandable. The Falksmen, you can see here some despoilers of Dorcaranthia, but they're going to be a little bit better against lighter units, which Angband don't have that many of. They're still going to be useful for their charge if they can be used at the right time, but for the most part I do agree with the idea of going for the heavier portion of the Easterling armies, more of them there. And that is pretty much it for the Easterlings. So that's, I mean, there's a lot of money that they've spent on their Lothlin units there. Now then, we have the horrors of Dungortheb, a more monstrous focused faction in the game you will not find. Karangwi Broodmothers, which I think there are javelins, so they're kind of like mini Mumakil, you could think of them as. If you remember the Beasts of Gaurhoth, maybe that's the sort of thing. Only monstrous units in Silmarillion have had the advantage of having a few updates since then, and I'm sure Reforged will follow along at some point in the future. But yeah, so they could be very useful. Dungortheb have got some fragility to them, even amongst their monstrous units, but they are quite a scary force once they get going. We have the Urush Abomination, which is a very, very similar unit to the Grandfather of the Deepwood Hearth over in the Avari, which we may be seeing later on as well, but yeah, basically a living artillery piece. Some Duso Manuthan East Hunters, so a unit of basic archers. I think they're facing off actually against Gaurhoth, which that's going to be an interesting fight because both of them have got weaknesses in kind of the same areas. They're a little bit more on display, I think, with Dungortheb because they've got access to more monsters, but it is going to be interesting to see how two factions who are maybe not sort of the most upfront, heavy-duty factions go and decide to fight one another. I think the emphasis is going to be a little bit more on Gaurhoth to actually be the ones to take the initiative because the Horrors will be hoping to catch them off guard with a few more guerrilla warfare style tactics. Plenty of Duso Manuthan Skull Splitters who'll be pretty good at dealing with the entry level units from Sauron's underlings across the way, but as soon as we get into stuff like Gijak Skaraz, then they're going to be in a pretty decent amount of trouble. The Devourers of Children, who look kind of like a... I mean, they do look horrifying, but in almost like a villain in a children's book kind of way, horrifying, maybe. They should do pretty well against Gaurhoth as well, because they are kind of meant to be kind of like a tar pit-esque unit, similar to some of the tree units in the Avari, but we'll see. We'll have to wait and see, and they should do well against the lighter units of Gaurhoth as well, which is kind of the order of the day, really. I don't know how many of these units from Dungortheb that we can see anyway are necessarily going to be the best at dealing with some of the heavier stuff that Gaurhoth can field, but we can't see all of the army either, so that is worth bearing in mind. Now then, we have Captain Gervais playing as Doriath. We see him playing as Doriath more than any other faction, I think, or at least we have over the time Silmarillion has been around. Rangers of the Girdle are here, sort of guarding against a flanking force from the Avari. We've got some Axe Guard of Region. I mean, in terms of individual quality, I think it's fairly clear that Doriath are going to have the edge over most factions on the field here. And Axe Infantry against the likes of the Avari should be very, very effective. We said the same about the Naugrim facing off against the Avari in the last battle, albeit Doriath are a little bit more light on their feet, so they shouldn't be given the runaround by the Avari quite so easily. As a slower faction like the Dwarves, plenty of Axe Guard. We've got the Cuthalim, who are an arm-piercing archer as well, maybe not so useful against the Avari, but could be useful against other factions later on, and they are just in general a fantastic unit anyway. Some Shield Bearers of Region, we've got some Axemen of the Girdle, their throwing axes could be useful. If they do get involved in a slinging match against the Avari, it's what the Avari would want though, so Doriath do have to be careful. Warriors of Region, Shield Bearers, so plenty of the Region units. We've also got the Donath and Mablung, so interesting to see the Great Mace units being fielded. Shield Bearers, and that's pretty much it for Doriath. There could be a few other units hidden, but they're already on the move, so I kind of doubt it. Now then, on to the red team. Starting with the Avari, we said in the last battle replay that it's very likely that we're going to be not seeing a large portion of the Avari, to be honest. Bow Wards of the Darkling Woods, once again, I've referred to them in the past as being like the ablative armour of the Avari. You throw them into a battle to buy time for other things, and they will do that for you, but they're not necessarily going to get many kills, especially not if you throw them up against something like Axe Guard of Region, who will tear through them in short order. Something which will be a little bit more able to pull their weight at the Stonehewers of Darkling Woods. They will still lose to the equivalent Doriath Axemen, but they will at least be able to do a little bit more damage in return. In behind them we have the Thorncasters. This is exactly the sort of thing which the Avari, once again, much like against the Naugrim in the last battle, are going to have to use these to very good effect against Doriath if they are to have much of a chance. But then that's really the case for the Avari in most battles they are in. They need to use their throwing projectiles well, otherwise they're in real trouble. Very long line of Stonehewers indeed. Here are the Thorned Ancients, again similar in terms of function I believe to the Devourers of Children over in the Horrors of Dungortheb. They are significantly tanky, but Doriath have got those heavy axemen to burn through units like that pretty quickly, so it's a tough matchup this, I think, for the Avari. But much of it is going to depend on how their hidden units get utilised, and of course we can't really make a judgment on that because we can't see them. Now, Wally Wolf playing as the Dominion of Gaurhoth. He's got some Laugskaraz Zagulaklab, which are the lighter wargs, so wargs are the order of the day for Gaurhoth, so I'd imagine, yes indeed, they have plenty of them here in the back lines, including the Hishtbuk-Kraz Pyre Wolves, which sort of mounted Greek fire units against a force like Dungortheb could be really useful, or Dungortheb's projectiles could make them difficult to use. I think that's going to be the key here behind who wins and loses this fight. It's who can utilise their projectiles the best. I mean, once again, we've got some mounted javelins in the Hishtbukraz Zagula Club. Scarahai Blood Drinkers and Trappers, so throwing projectiles on foot. The Blood Drinkers, there's not a huge amount of armoured units on foot anyway in the Horrors of Dungortheb, but the monstrous units, that's where these axemen could come in very handy, but the monsters can of course keep moving in most situations. One of the scariest singular units in the game is the Hishtbukraz Ash Priests, with their Napatoon-esque projectiles. Also in melee they are very, very scary as well. They may not look like much, they may look like just like grey orc javelins with some horns, but don't let that fool you. They are certainly one of the premier units in the game in my opinion. And then we've got some Gijak Skaraz Wolfguard back here. It's these heavier units which I think the Horrors of Dungortheb will struggle to deal with a little bit more so perhaps, and included in the deal with that is the Gijak Skaraz Chosen, maybe more so with the Gijak Skaraz Chosen because they have a more defensive edge to them, and the armour piercing of the Wolfguard is not really all that necessary against the Horrors. And then some Hunters here at the front who are just going to be trading back and forth with the low tier archers of the Horrors. And last but by no means least, we have Panthan and Barsoom playing as Angband. Angband, one of the easier factions to play, I would suggest. They are very effective at what they do, and their playstyle is very simple to understand. You load up on heavy units, and then you overrun your opponent with sheer strength. Kind of similar to Angmar, I guess, in that regard, albeit they are much more about front-loading and doing a little bit more damage, perhaps. Wretches of Angband on the front line, covering for some Tormentors of the Iron Crown. I mean, they're an armor-piercing unit which, depending on what the Easterlings bring, could be more useful or less useful. More useful on this occasion though, because of all of the Lothlin units that are here in high numbers. We have got some Ironshod Halberdiers, unsurprisingly. That's why I said we might see some halberd on halberd violence. The Iron Drakes of Angband, we've already seen the Pyre Wolves. This is a similar kind of unit, albeit they are on foot. I don't know how useful they're necessarily going to be, because it's very easy to see them coming. They do stand out with their slightly brass armour, so it's going to be really incumbent on the Easterlings to try and prevent them from doing their thing, otherwise they will pay the price by being cooked alive. Scourges of Gothmog will be a little bit more useful at dealing with some of the lighter units, perhaps, with the Despoilers of Dor-Caranthia being one such example. They would kind of counter one another though, so I'm not sure. More Thralls of Angband, so they've got some low tier archers which can be utilised. They will lose the skirmish fight in this battle against the Fangs of the Faithless, but there's no need for Angband to really allow this to turn into a skirmish battle. They should be being far more aggressive than that. Spearguard of the Iron Crown can be useful for covering against those Easterling cavalry units. Ironshod Legionaries and Halberds back here. Some Arbalists. I mean, this is where Angband can lay down a beating at long range with their crossbows, more so than their very low-end archers. The Mangonel is here. They do need to be careful of the Easterling catapult, but if they can get the Mangonel to work, then the Easterlings, when they're in a formation like that, it's worrying times for them. Trollguard of Gothmog are also over here. There's 2 units of Trollguard of Gothmog, which is an interesting thing to go into the red limit on, but there we are. And then we also have some Wolf Riders back here as well. So this has got all the makings of a very multifaceted field battle. This is going to be very fast and furious. I can imagine half speed is going to be employed with some regularity in this one, because it's going to all be happening quite quickly. But yeah, without further ado, let's get this show on the road. So there's no obvious way in which this particular 3v3 is going to begin, because I don't know who's actually going to be the ones to want to move forward first. Now, I recommend the red team want to be that, with the possible exception of the Avari, but as we saw in the last Silmarillion battle replay we showed, not everyone on the same team needs to advance in step with one another. As long as they have a plan and they're willing to stick to it, they can simply wait. And you can see now the artillery already being traded back and forth, and already we're also going to see the potentially devastating effects of the Mangonel. Rather fortunately for them, however, much of them missing, much of those shots. I would imagine, I'm actually a little bit surprised that they're not going after the artillery. They're going after one of the Trollguard units, which is probably one of the worst targets you could pick, because if it hits, great, but it's very likely to not hit. There's no actual sound effects here on the artillery, which is a little bit peculiar, but I feel like this is something which has been remarked upon in Silmarillion before, so I guess it's just one of those bugs which is persisting. You can hear the burning sound effect of the crispy corpses on the floor after all. It is a very odd glitch though, but yeah, the Urush Abomination firing in. The blue team so far maintaining their shape. Mangonel going to fire once again, so trading back and forth. Plenty of artillery on the field today, it must be said. There's also the Grandfather of the Deepwood Hearth, so both of the single entity living artillery pieces are on display today. The Duso Manuthan archers are going to be firing into their Hishtbukras counterparts as they move forwards. Fairly easy kills. I mean, I imagine this moment of caution is not going to last too long in this fight. I think that when the fight actually does get underway, it's going to be pretty violent and rapid, just based on the amount of frames that we have. Doriath will really be fancying their chances in melee against the Avari. We saw the dwarves, at least initially in the last battle, perform very well against a lot of these Avari units. But in the end, the Avari were actually able to outlast and still be useful to their team's victory until the late game. I think against Doriath they match up even worse, to be honest. Those Doriath Axemen, with their damage, are going to prove to be a real problem for the Avari to have to reckon with. Hishbukras trying to return fire now, but they've already taken so many losses that I'm not sure this is the way for Wally Wolf. Much in the way of damage has already been done. The Karangui Gore Swarm reveal themselves, the little beetle or tick-like creatures. It does make your skin crawl, doesn't it? Bullshit Abomination firing it alongside the catapult from the Easterlings. This is a sign really that Angband really don't need to be just hanging around here. And many of the losses they've taken have been just wretches, which they won't mind too much, but there really is no need to be this cautious. And thankfully, I mean, I can read into the fact that the battle isn't the longest affair, that they're not going to be as cautious maybe as you would expect. The ambush has been sprung now though, the Croatani nomads revealing themselves from the trees. I mean, they're going to be able to do decent damage here as the Wolf Riders of Angband pass by, especially as the shield is now not going to be coming into effect. The loss of a unit of cavalry could prove to be pretty vital. Meanwhile, it's actually over here between the Avari and Doriath where the battle is going to get underway first and foremost. Doriath will be utilising their own throwing axes. The last thing the Avari need is to be surrendering the advantage in those terms. Mevon against Captain Gervais. Captain Gervais last time played as the Avari. We'll see if he can overcome his former faction this time around. Thorncast is going to be doing some decent damage. I mean, that is the upshot of this. A lot of the Avari's projectiles will be more effective against the lighter Doriath units than they were against the Nalgrim last time out. The Axguard of Region already looking like they may rout. The Stone Hewers holding up pretty well so far. The Branch Stalkers on the way. Shield Bearers on the way forward. Rangers of the Girdle. It's pretty violent, this fight, but I think Doriath will. You can see here that the tree class units, the Thorned Ancients, making a nuisance to themselves, making life a little bit more difficult for Doriath to be organised. But so far, so good as far as the Avari are concerned. They haven't been dumpstered as hard as maybe they could be fearing. Ishbukras, Hunters still doing their thing. And already we can see that, as in pitched battles we often see, allies coming to the aid of one another. So the Duso Manuthan Beast Hunters may be going to the aid of Doriath now a little bit. I think this is as a result of some, yeah, you can see some Tolin Gaurhoth units moving across to try and assist Doriath. I mean, the Scarahide Blood Drinkers, armour piercing is somewhat useful against Doriath, but certainly more so than it is against a lot of the Duso Manuthan infantry of Dungortheb. So all of these units now clashing together, but I have to say Doriath's attack maybe hasn't gone quite as well as you would expect, but then there is a certain amount of layering going on here by the Avari. The first layer should be overcome at some point. It's just whether or not Doriath expend too much of their energy in doing so. Another Thorned Ancient Falls. More projectiles coming in. Poison javelins from the ranges of the hidden path. The stone hewers now in behind enemy lines. How far are they going to actually be able to go though? Branch stalkers hitting the spear host. Ranges of the hidden path getting some good hits from the Silverthorn arrows there. Mounted company of Region as well, so maybe overextending themselves a little bit here, the Avari, getting a bit far ahead of themselves. Moving over here to where the Skara High are in place as well. There's not enough Doriath infantry over here to actually withstand the onslaught that is to come. We are now seeing the beginnings of an engagement here between Angband and the Easterlings. The Easterling front line more well prepared, however. I mean, Angband were the ones to have to move forward, so the Easterlings don't need to move as far. The Halberdiers already in place, however. The Wretches not going to do quite so well. The Tormentors of the Iron Crown, if they can be held at bay by the Easterling halberds, then the men in gold will be pretty happy with that. Their own Halberdiers moving forward, the Vanguard of Lothlin trying to get a charge off before the Angband polearms can get settled. It's a rather large engagement here, and you can see the Grandfather of the Deep Hearth getting into position. The numbers of Angband could prove to be vital here, though, as you can see. A bit of wrapping around already beginning. What on earth was that? That was... I mean, this is a very clustered unit of Warband of Lothlin. They need to move out of the way pretty quickly, otherwise the Grandfather of the Deepwood Hearth is going to get a lot of kills very, very quickly. In come the Troll Guard as well. I mean, this is the thing with Angband. Angband is such an intimidating force to have to face off against when they start rolling towards you, and crunching in from the side here with Troll Guard, holding on to from the front with Iron Shods and Iron Crown units. It's going to be a tough ask here for the Easterlings, but they've equipped themselves as well as they can, I think, with the kind of units they've elected to bring. And over on this side, Angband are much more undermanned, so maybe with a little bit of support from Dungortheb, they could really start pushing in on the enemy, but Dungortheb might be a little bit more reluctant to move tons of support over, given that they've already started sending over stuff to help Doriath, and they don't want to leave themselves open to a frontal assault from Gaurhoth. Speaking of which, Doriath are still struggling a lot more than I thought they would, actually. Maybe this is just me not giving credit to the Avari where it's due. I mean, they are capable of being pretty savage themselves in melee, and Doriath don't have the defensive attributes to fall back on like the Dwarves did last time out. So maybe it's not quite as cut and dry. Still pushing in from the side a little bit more. Donath and Mablung. Exactly the sort of units which will be good actually against these tree class units. So that is something to bear in mind. Mounted company of Region going to leave. Ishtbuk are on the way over now as well, so support for both sides over here. Dungortheb and I think Gaurhoth have probably done a better job at backing the Avari up than Gaurhoth have done, than Dungortheb have done so far at helping their allies out, and that may be one of the defining features as well. Doriath have had to make do more or less on their own. I mean, we're starting to see some of the Duso Manutha arrive now, but is it going to be quick enough? In the middle here, Ishbukra's hunters, still no actual engagement from the front, but more and more reinforcements being siphoned off. What have we got going on over here? Another unit of Troll Guard moving forward, but there's too many Lothlin units around for them to really make the kind of impression they would have been hoping for. The Grandfather of the Deepwood Hearth is still running. Bulldogs are in here, but again, they're looking a little bit isolated, aren't they? And I have to say, the Easterling front line has certainly done its job here. Salamandrine Guard running through the back lines, the flanking force from Angband not yet really delivering any sort of killer blow, and indeed many of their basic units are starting to rout actually, so the Easterling solidity actually doing its thing, trying to burn the Grandfather of the Deepwood Hearth. Also another flanking unit, I mean probably the best unit they have for flanking on foot is the Despoilers of Dulcaranthir, and they're ripping their way through the entry level Angband wretches. And the Salamandrine Guard are in here as well, so yeah, the Eastlings are going to get a handy victory here over Angband. The Iron Drakes may be trying to move in, and this is a bad sign for the red team, this, because elsewhere things were still a little bit more inconclusive, but this is a fairly significant victory. And the Devourers of Children on the way across as well. I don't know if something like bulldogs are capable of having children, so maybe they'll have to make do with devouring them instead. But yeah, this is a significant victory, this, for the Easterlings. So Doriath are going to need to hope that they can turn things around over here. Gaurhoth and Mablung are starting to do that, and you can see that over on this flank, Doriath are victorious. They're going to be starting to push north, I would imagine. I mean, it's not looking like there's all that much left from either side here. Things can develop very quickly. Do so Manuthan facing off against the Thorncasters. The wargs from Gaurhoth are going to make Doriath's transit significantly more difficult. Here are the Vorbak Gadrutar, another one of the Gaurhoth wargs, a little bit better off the charge, so staying in melee with some of these Doriath infantrymen maybe isn't advised. Silverthorn arrows doing their thing. So yeah, Doriath have come out of this fight looking a little bit better. Yeah, but it was actually the Avari that needed the victory there, wasn't it? Given the developments in the Easterlings' favour over on the other side, the horrors of Dungortheb now feeling emboldened by the Easterling victory and Doriath's progress, perhaps. That's got to be Angband. All of these crawlers, creepy crawlies now, from Dungortheb coming over here to finish off the Avari, and these fast movers will be able to overcome any sort of Avari trickery, you'd imagine. The Urush abomination is still roaming around the map as well, Kuthalim, so I'd be very surprised at this point if the blue team didn't go on to win. That's got to be Angband. No, actually probably the Avari, so things turned around for the Avari there pretty quickly. It looked like things were going pretty well for them, and then very, very fast Doriath were able to turn things around. So now it's just Angband and Gaurhoth. I mean, Gaurhoth not moving forward. Again, like, it's exactly the same thing that Dungortheb did, though, so it's not really something that can be criticised. It's just, in much the same way as in the last battle, it feels as though the part of the battle here, this being the middle, where things were a little bit more standoffish, not quite as direct, it's more circumstantial whose inaction is going to be rewarded and whose is going to be punished based on what happens here on the two flanks. And unfortunately for Gaurhoth, their allies on both flanks appear to have crumbled in the face of this pressure, and I don't think they're going to have enough. And this is before, really, we've ever got to see how the Gijak Skaraz would react to dealing with a lot of the lighter Dungortheb units, and at this point there's not going to be enough, surely. The Easterlings continuing to move forward, maybe a little bit faster than their allies were prepared for, but Dungortheb, I think, are starting to move through the centre now. What remains of Doriath, more damaged certainly than the Easterlings were, also going to be attacking from the other side. Scarahai Blood Drinkers, that arm piercing is going to be what's required to crack through the Lothland armour, but they themselves don't have the highest defensive values. Plenty of these Lothland units. We can actually see the Gijak Skaraz Wolfguard are over here, another armour piercing unit, which will be useful at dealing with these heavier Easterling units. The Mangonel crew also now being engaged by the Despoilers, still the Salamandrine Guard as well, giving the Easterlings the map control they need over on this side of things. Ironshot Arbalists doing their thing. Finally able to get a little bit of vengeance on the Salamanders for the losses they inflicted on Angband earlier on, and I'm sure later on as well. There's still the Ash Priests, could prove to be a real problem. All of the monsters still moving around in a big goon squad from Dungortheb and the Brood Mothers. Moving through the Hunters, Ishbakraz Hunters, not really what you need when you're dealing with spiders the size of garden sheds, but do so Manuthan units, consolidating all of the gains that they've made. There's only one unit of Gijak Skaraz chosen now in position in the Skull Splitters. Yeah, I mean, they have them exactly where they want them at this point. This is a significantly less close battle than the last one that we saw, but in many ways it followed the same path. Our tiny nomads moving in. There's actually the hunting pack, which we haven't seen up until this point, the Hounds. Just a shock unit that you can utilise, a fairly numerous one, but if they do get bogged down then they're going to get slaughtered pretty quickly. yeah, Gijak Skaraz chosen. Well, actually, probably do pretty well actually against these forces they're up against. The Croatani cavalry, these spiders. They are getting just overwhelmed, and yeah, they end up breaking in the face of such terrifying opposition. Do so Manuthan now moving forward. Doriath are on the way, but they can afford to take things a little easier at this point, I would suggest, given their exertions against the Avari trickery earlier on. That was Ash Priest projectiles, was it not? When you go after the Salamandrine Guard to prevent any sort of rear assault. Ironshot Arbalists still alive, but not for too much longer, with the Salamanders bearing down on them. Shotel's drawn. And that's going to be that. Flattened. I think these efforts against the Easterlings are probably the most comprehensive for the red team that are left. Scourges of Gothmog facing off against the Despoilers. But yeah, some rear charging going on now. Croatani Nomads obviously not brilliant at rear charging, but you make do with what you have. Halberdiers of Lothlan still alive, obviously proving to be a very important unit for the Easterlings earlier in this battle. Do so Manuthan Skullsplitters still trying to use their ranged attacks, even though they're getting engaged in melee by a still quite surprisingly healthy actually unit of Gijak Skaraz Wolfguard. Skullsplitters and Beast Hunters. Oof. That was pretty brutal and vicious. Is that the Iron Drakes? Or the Pyre Wolves? It's one of the two, I think. I don't know where that came from. Ah, there we are. Yes, it is. It's the Iron Drakes from Angband. I mean, one last spit in the eye, I suppose, before the inevitable blue team victory. Hunting pack charging across the hillside. Some Goreswarm hunters, all the creepy crawlies once again being brought to bear. Scourges of Gothmog, are they locked morale? Because they're still eager, and they're not in a fight where they should be eager. Although I guess they're on the periphery of this engagement, but they're losing. Getting crushed underfoot now. Do so Manuthan Hunting Pack and the Amberona Honor Guard finishing off the Iron Drakes. One last volley was indeed all they were able to muster. Karangui Brood Mothers still very much alive. I mean, when you keep monstrous units moving, it can be a real challenge to bring them down. I mean, we haven't really seen that be the be-all and end-all of Dungortheb's efforts this time around, but it is something worth mentioning that when you face off against Dungortheb, if they can keep their big spiders moving through your lines, it can be very, very tough, but they are micro-intensive in that way, because in many ways, if Dungortheb do get caught out and forced into an engagement, that's where they're at their very weakest. Another player admits defeat. I'm wondering what's left, actually. I think it might be Ash Priests that are in and amongst this mob. Hopefully I don't want this, I don't want my PC to overheat as a result of this very condensed engagement. But yeah, a significantly less close battle this one, but as I mentioned, for the same reasons, we saw the team that won pick up their victory. The delicate balancing act of supporting your allies whilst maintaining your own position on the map. And certainly I think that's something that the blue team did better here. I think Toll and Gaurhoth, while they supported the Avari well enough, I think the Angband needed that support more so. The Easterlings were well prepared for the kind of assault Angband were about to throw at them, and a bit of support maybe from something like the Pyre Wolves or at least some of the Javelin Wargs would have been enough to give a little bit more pause for the Easterlings, and it would have also forced Dungortheb's hand a little bit more too. The domino effect could have fallen in a rather interesting way there. But as it is, a great feast. I really don't want to see what an Dungortheb feast looks like, but there we have it. A good victory here in the end for the blue team, with the Easterlings certainly being the premier faction on the field today. Able to repulse that Angband assault. I mean, in many ways, Angband being aggressive like that is exactly what you want to see. But it's all about execution, really. I mean, the Easterlings were able to hold their line very nicely. One side for Angband was weak. They were closer to the peripheral support, at the very least, of Dungortheb as well, the Easterlings. Angband didn't receive any such thing from Gaurhoth. That's the main thing I would say about this battle. It is also worth saying, though, that on the other side, Doriath, despite a rough start, were able to overcome Mevon's Avari army. So even if things had gone differently in the Angband side of the map, the blue team was still very much in the ascendancy because of Doriath's efforts over on the other side as well. Let's see what did the damage for the Easterlings, shall we? I mean, plenty of damage from the Halberdiers, definitely the MVPs here. If you're going to withstand a direct assault from Angband, you need something to be able to, you know, make your line as solid as possible. And the Halberdiers don't only do that, but their armour piercing means they're able to do decent damage against most of what Angband have to offer. Certainly the Iron Shods, even the Iron Crown units are not going to do too well. Angband can respond with their own halberds, but they had them in fewer numbers, and because they were the ones moving forward, the Easterling ones were always going to be able to organise themselves a little bit more easily. Guarded as well by the Clan Guard and Warband. I mean, less kills from them, but then they're really just meant to be the shield in that equation. And Barona Honour Guard as well, right in the thick of things, but again, more of a defensively styled unit. The artillery, despite the prevalence of artillery on the field today, I think, with the possible exception of the Urush Abomination from Dungortheb, there wasn't actually much impact by the various artillery pieces. It came about more as a result of infantry and cavalry. Despoilers of Dorkaranthia doing decently. The Fangs of the Faithless actually racking up a pretty decent kill count by the end. Very difficult to keep track of them, of course. And Ferrotani Nomads with a good ambush, but the Salamandrine Guard as well. They and the Halberdiers, I think, were the two key units for the Eastlings, as they often are. You know, there's no great surprise in that. So yeah, big thank you to Lord of Belagost for pointing this battle replay out. Big thank you to Waffles as well for having the foresight to record it and post up in the Discord. Depending if the temperatures around here persist, there may be a couple more of these that I record. Like I said, they're not going to be following on one after the other, but for a little while at the very least, it may be that the Wednesday battle is a Silmarillion replay in this guise. And then the weekend ones are the more traditional sort of reforged siege battles, just to try and beat the heat, as it were. My poor old PC, I don't know how much life it necessarily has left in it, but I want to keep using it for recording for the time being, because it allows me to essentially use my other PC as I will while it's rendering. So we'll see how long I can keep this particular workflow going for before I'm forced to transfer everything onto my new PC. Probably not for too much longer, honestly, probably for a couple of months at most, but yeah, that is what's going to be happening for the time being. So yeah, that's Saturdays, Reforged, Siege Battles, Wednesdays, Silmarillion, this sort of thing. By the time this is actually coming out and being released, it will have already been, it's already in the past basically, so things will have changed, but that's kind of what I'm thinking. These are my thoughts just out loud here. I will also at some point in the future be doing the knockout tourney for the two-handed infantry. Excuse me. I don't know when I'm going to be doing that though, because I feel like that's probably going to have to wait until after my next trip away for work, which is very likely to be another full 3 weeks, unfortunately for myself. But yeah, we'll wait and see on that one, because I think I'm going to have probably 2 weeks off following on from my next trip away for work. I think that is going to be the that's going to be the answer. Anyway, that's just me again rambling here at the end of one of these replays, so I think we'll cut it short there. What's going to be happening up next, I mean, you'll probably be seeing another Reforged battle replay followed by another Silmarillion one, and that's how I think I'm going to record ahead for the 3 weeks that I'm away this time around. So yeah, again, big thanks to all the players. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.